Cord. All right, well, thank you everyone for being here. I'm Zoe Miller. I'm the Vice President of Learning for ECE-RJ, and we are so excited to have Laura Goldstein Cooper here with us today. Let me just let in another, there we go. Laura Goldstein Cooper is a lifelong early childhood educator who believes that with deep educator content knowledge, high expectations and care, all children can reach their full potential and love the process of doing so. She has a BA from Emory and an MA in ECE from Pace University. Welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I will jump in. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. We're a small group, so I'd love we'll talk about participation, but please, please, please participate. All right, here we go. So this is me, and that's my family. I have been working in education, elementary, for around 20 years, and I've spent almost all of that time teaching and leading in the early elementary space with a primary focus on literacy. I'm also a mom of two. My daughter is 7 and my son is 4, and we live in Connecticut, and both of my children have attended Jewish preschools. And I want to tell you a little bit about why I do this work with preschool teachers and why I started to over the past year, having these conversations around some literacy foundational skills with preschool teachers. So given my job and the age of my kids and everything, all of my worlds intersecting, I've spoken to a lot of parents who have asked me what they can do to teach their child to read before kindergarten. And I respond, you don't need to. Learning to read does not need to be, it should not be the focus of pre-K. But then I also started to talk to a few friends of mine who were preschool teachers and having similar conversations, not about how to teach kids to read, but about what components of literacy can they focus on that would be helpful in preschool and developmentally appropriate. And part of my response has always included phonological awareness, could be and very helpful and is developmentally appropriate for the preschool age. And often, not always, but often the response is a look of confusion because it's not a term that they've heard. And so that's kind of how I started to think, well, maybe I can talk to more preschools and preschool teachers and tell them a little bit more about this type of work that you can do with kids that is very helpful as they get into kindergarten. And so that's kind of how this session came to be. We are going to be using a handout. I'm going to put it in the chat. I just need to find my chat. Hold on. Oh, they disappear. There it is. Okay. The handout is in the chat. Everyone should have permission. I'm also going to do a new share. I see there's a few people in it, and I'm going to show you just quickly to make sure everybody knows how to make a copy. So in order to use the handout, because you can be writing in it, and then I want to make sure you have access to it after this session, because the permissions will change on this one after the session. You're going to go to File, and you click Make a Copy, and then you'll have your own copy. Okay. And then in terms of participation, we're such a small group. And so please make sure you're coming off mute, asking questions. This session is for you. And so I want to tailor it, and we can tweak as we go since we're so small. And I want to make sure I answer everybody's questions. And the session is just also so much more fun when we have people coming off mute and participating. You also can use the chat, and we will be using the chat. So make sure you're ready for that. And if you have a question, you can raise a virtual hand and I will try to see it. Okay. So we're going to jump in. When we think about preschool and the importance of this time in a child's life, we know that play, making friends, social emotional learning, love of learning, and self-care or independence are the most important parts of preschool. And while literacy and loving books and learning from books is a core part of preschool, learning to read is not. And as I mentioned before, that's right. There is no need to move down the pressure to learn to read into preschool. But because this session is focused on early literacy foundational skills, I always want to make sure I name and emphasize that this is not about learning to read in preschool, but instead about strengthening foundational skills that will help students learn to read when they get to kindergarten. Another reason why I think this session is incredibly relevant is because right now within education and literacy, the research that is being termed or called the science of reading, which is a combination of decades of research, it is a hot topic, and rightfully so. Teaching all children to become proficient readers in elementary school is an incredibly important and often challenging job. And while teaching children to read is, of course, not your job, it is important to keep in mind what is happening within the next educational phase of a child's life. And on top of that, when it comes to the science of reading, which you see a detailed visual model of here, and this is referred to as Scarborough's reading rope, there are many ways in which preschool teachers do support students on their journey to reading proficiency without even knowing it. And so I want to highlight some of those now. For example, when it comes to language comprehension, and this is oral language comprehension, in preschool, kids are building background knowledge, they're building vocabulary, they're working on expressive and receptive language, which are going to all impact their oral language comprehension. And your reading comprehension can only be as strong as your oral language comprehension. I often explain whatever you can orally understand will really be the ceiling on your reading comp. And so by working on oral language comprehension, which you do in preschool, you are really, really, really helping kids have a strong foundation that will set them up to be able to understand what they read. But today, we're going to be talking about ways you can, and maybe even ways you already are, supporting students with their phonological awareness, which you see is an important part of the rope that is down on the bottom, which is learning to recognize words. So today our objectives of this session are to be able to define and explain what phonological and phonemic awareness are and why they are important in the development of early reading skills. And this is an overview. We're just getting to know phonological awareness at a high level. And then we're going to set some vision of what this can look like in terms of activities. And also, in this session, I'm not sure what everybody's background is, but we may have people in the session that have never heard of the word phonological awareness. So this will be brand new. But we also could have people that maybe got their master's in literacy. So we might have a whole range of experience. And I want to recognize that and name that depending on where you are, just think about what you are hoping to take away from the session and also what you can give. And we're going to jump into phonological awareness and content. So here we go. We're going to get started with a game because a lot of this is done through games, which is why it's so fun for kids. This is a name game. You will introduce yourself by saying, "Hello, my name is," and your name. However, you're going to swap out the first sound or phoneme, because a phoneme is a sound, in each word with a sound that is represented in one of the speech bubbles. So for example, since my name is Laura, I would say, "Bello by Bame Biz Bora." And then I'll call on someone else to introduce themselves, and they will choose a phoneme to swap out. So before I call on you to come off mute, just practice, choose one sound, and practice while you're on mute by yourself, and then I'll call on someone else to introduce themselves. Okay, Zoe, you laughed. You come off mute first. Go.
Hello, Ty, Tame, Tis, Toey.
There you go. Okay. Zoe, call on someone else.
Toey, Lisa.
Fellow Phi Fame Fizz Fisa. I'll call on Maya.
think you're on mute. Or we can't hear you.
Maya, we don't hear you.
We can't hear you, Maya.
Okay.
There you go.
I think there's something wrong with your microphone. All right, you practice silently. I'll call on
Yeah.
Monique. I call on Monique instead.
Fellow by fame biz bony.
Okay, and call on someone else.
Sorry. I am not on the.
You can call on Audrey.
Okay, Audrey.
Okay. Bello by Bame Biz Baudry.
And then Lara, I'm not sure if you're able to come off mute. If you are, you can give it a go. Nope. Okay, we're going to keep going. All right, so let's think about what you had to know or be able to do to complete this task. Was it natural for you? Was it hard for you? And then did it get easier each round? And you can just put your reflections in the chat. So it does get easier, right? You see how at first it feels like really awkward, but then it gets much easier. In order to be able to do this task, here are the skills that you need to have. So you first need to be able to orally decode or hear what a word is, right? You had to take that sentence and say like, this is a word, this is a word, this is a word, this is a word. Then you needed to be able to identify the beginning sound in each word. And then you needed to substitute, or in the case of the word is, because it starts with a vowel sound, you actually added an initial sound. Everything else you were swapping or substituting. And that is a phonological and a phonemic awareness game. And when we think about who this game is right for, it's right for a range of kids. It would feel hard and awkward for them at first, but then they'd get used to it if they played a game like this in morning meeting. So this may be just right for some 4-year-olds. It may be too hard for some 4-year-olds. Kindergartners would love a game like this, but also some preschoolers would be able to do a game like this and would find it really funny. And they would be practicing sound awareness and phonological awareness without even realizing, without it feeling so academic. Here's another example of a phonological awareness game. This is called Jacob, Where Are You? I am going, because we're not in person, I'm actually just going to explain this game. But if you go to page 9 of your handout, there is a printout of it. So you can also just look as I am explaining. But we'll have time to do that also later. So in this game, the children are all sitting on the carpet or their tables, but they're all sitting and it's a quiet game. And you choose one person to be Jacob and you hand that child in like secretively a farm animal or an animal that makes a recognizable noise. And all of the other children close their eyes and the child who's acting as Jacob goes to a part of the room and hides and they make the animal noise. And everybody else with their eyes closed points to where that child is. And they also say the name of the animal. That is another example of a lower level one, but that is another example of a phonological awareness game because it's awareness of sound. And in order for the children to play that game, they need to do lower level skills like identify the area the sound is coming from and identify the animal that makes that sound. And because that is a lower level game, this would be more appropriate for 3 and 4-year-olds, some 2-year-olds, kid dependent, though I'm pretty sure 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds would also find it funny. And all of those games, those 2 games and all of those tasks are phonological awareness. And that is because phonological awareness is the awareness of sound. It's oral, it's auditory, it's not visual, meaning you do not need to have letters to do it. It is the ability to identify, isolate, and manipulate sounds in language. It's also an umbrella term that includes many different skills. For example, you have syllables, onset and rhyme, then you see phonemes, which are individual sounds, but all of these terms, word awareness that you see under this umbrella are different phonological awareness skills that can be practiced. Phonological awareness is also a continuum, and it goes from larger units of sounds within words to smaller units of sounds within words. So you might start with a larger unit like oral rhymes, like kids recognizing that box and fox rhyme, to then them understanding how to differentiate between words in a sentence. And again, it's not visual, they're not reading, they could be clapping words. Then syllables within a word. So then clapping out or paying attention to how many times their chin goes down when they say a word to count syllables, or how many breaths of air they're pushing out of their mouth. Then to onset rhyme. So for example, if the word is box, the onset is b and the rhyme is ox. A rhyme within a word, and this rhyme is spelled R-I-M-E, is the vowel and everything that comes after it. And then finally, the smallest unit of sounds is that you work with are individual phonemes in words. A phoneme is an individual sound. And you see that on the right-hand side of your screen, it starts out with simpler. The larger the unit, the simpler it is to work with, and it works its way all the way down to more complex. The smaller the unit of sound, the more complex it is, and the harder it is for kids to work with. Oftentimes, you'll hear people interchangeably use the word or the terms phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. And we have to remember that phonological awareness is the umbrella term that all of these sound awareness skills fit in. Phonemic awareness refers to the specific ability to focus on and manipulate those individual sounds in words. So phonemes are just those individual sounds. They can be represented by more than one letter, right? We know that the ch sound is represented by CH, but it's still just one sound. And because phonemic awareness is the most complex part of phonological awareness, you see that that's where K through 2 educators spend their time focusing on when they are working on this, on sound awareness, whereas pre-K educators are going to spend more of their time on working with larger units of sounds. Any questions on some of the phonological awareness information that I just presented? If you have any, put them in the chat, or you can raise a hand. We're going to play a game. And this will be a quick, this is a phonemic awareness game, and it's just going to be a quick check so that you can say, like, where am I? Am I able to identify all of the sounds within the words? Okay. So I'm going to show you a picture, and in the chat or on your fingers, up to you, you're going to put how many phonemes or how many individual sounds are in that word. Okay. This is also something you could do with kids in the second half of pre-K if you had kids that were more advanced with this. Okay, dog. How many sounds are in the word dog? So it's 3, d, g, right? Each letter makes its own sound. Okay, now let's think about the word shoe. How many phonemes or sounds are in the word shoe? And that, Lisa got it. That's 2. Sh, oo, sh, oo. Okay, and here comes a harder one, octopus. Okay, so we have a range here. If you said 3, you were counting syllables. You were doing octopus. So those are the syllables, not the sounds. It's actually 7. Each letter in the word octopus makes its own sound. So it's a, k, t, o, s. If a kid needed to phonetically spell the word octopus, not a preschooler, but just as like an FYI, like if a first grader were writing a story or writing an informational book about octopuses, they could actually segment the word octopus into individual sounds and easily write it. And that's where actually phonological awareness goes, phonemic awareness goes. As kids get older, they get to these words that are bigger and they need to segment them to break them apart into sounds so that they can spell words. Okay, so that was, you saw that there. Then we're going to do another game. All right, so this is an example of at an adult level, but you would do this differently with children, obviously, but at an adult level, how you would work across the entire phonological awareness continuum. You go from larger units to smaller units. So in your handout on page 2, you are going to see you have these you have this speech bubble. And in the speech bubble, there are some words. You're going to take a minute and you're going to answer the questions in red about what you see in the speech bubble. And then we'll go over our answers and we'll talk about what was easy, what's hard, and why. Okay, you're probably not done with the last question. That's okay. But we're going to go over the answers to the other ones. All right, on your fingers, how many sentences? Yeah, how many words? Right, and if we were doing this, if I were if we were in person, I actually potentially wouldn't, or if you were with a group of kids, you wouldn't even need to have this. You would just say it to them. How are you today? And you would have them figure out how many words. Okay, can someone come off mute, or can somebody actually, let's say on your fingers, how many syllables are there? Yes. Lisa, can you come off mute and can you break it? And I think I couldn't see, Monique, I don't think I could see your hands, but I think you had 10 too. But Lisa, can you come off mute and can you break down those words into syllables for us?
Okay. How is 1, are is 1, you is 1, today,
Mm-hmm.
are you having fun?
That's right. Okay. And for kids, you can teach kids to break down syllables and words by paying attention to their chin. It's a syllable is every time a breath of air is pushed out of your mouth. That's one syllable. That's hard for a kid to understand, but they can pay attention to their chin. So if we said having, everybody put your finger on your chin, your hands on your chin, having. Your chin goes down 2 times, right? Kids can count that. They're like, oh, that's 2 syllables. If we said water, water, your chin goes down twice. And whereas if we said cup, Your chin goes down once. It's one syllable. And that's how we can teach that to kids. Now, here are those answers. Now, the hardest question was how many total phonemes? And I will say that almost no one gets this right, but you can just give it a go, put it in the chat. How many phonemes? Really? The chin, you never heard that? Okay, well, now you have a new trick. Monique, you are right. It is 20. And let me tell you this, nobody gets this right. So you should give yourself a pat on the back. All right, here's the
It
break.
was a guess.
It was a guess, but you're right. Okay, here's the breakdown, and I'm going to say it out loud. It's in blue. So it's ow, r, y, oo, t, oo, d, a. R, y, oo, av, I, ng, n. That's how you would break down these words. It's not that is not relevant for preschool, but what I'm trying to the important thing for us as adults to know is that identifying the number of sounds in words is the hardest task for everyone, and there is a reason why. And that is because our brains are not set up to be aware of individual sounds in language. Our brains are naturally wired for language, right? From the time we're babies, we're aware, our sound processors are lighting up when we hear our parents' voices, even as babies, but they are not wired to hear the individual sounds in words. And that's because writing was invented 5,000 years ago, and it's just not enough time for our brains to have evolved to naturally learn how to read. So when we speak, this is the sciencey part of the session. When we speak, the auditory part of your brain, which is called the phonological processor, it automatically lights up. Right now in your brains, if you had zero reading instruction, you never were taught how to read, you're listening to me speak, the phonological processor is working. That happens naturally. But right here, these images show what happens when a fluent reader sees a word. So when a fluent reader sees a word, initially you see that just the visual processor is lit up. That's the part of the brain that processes images around us. But the phonological processor, which is the part that's circled in red, it's dull. It's inactive initially. But if you look a few milliseconds down, or a few brains down, which is what's happening in when they did brain imaging, what's happening in our brains over milliseconds. When a fluent reader sees a word within milliseconds, actually, you see that both the visual processor and the phonological processor are lit up, which means that fluent readers, all of us, have actually rewired our brains so that when we see written language, it not only triggers the visual processor, but it's also triggering the part of our brain that manages speech, which is the auditory processor. So seeing a word actually will make you hear a word. And part of that rewiring that needs to happen to learn to read is phonological awareness. And it has to have, every brain needs it. And it's complex because it's not natural for our brain. So this part of our brain that processes sounds, it has to be developed. Every single, even for those kids that you have in preschool that somehow have taught themselves to read at age 3 and 4, and no one can really explain why, even their phonological processors need to be developed. Every human brain, our phonological processors need to develop so that we can learn to read. Some processors need more development than others. So for kids that are going to struggle to learn to read, this work with sounds is crucial. And because of that, because everybody needs this, when you focus on sounds, it's beneficial for all kids, but it's really critical for some kids. And what we're going to do, actually, I'm worried that we won't have time. So there's an article, it's in your handout. You guys are going to go back, you have it as a resource. But Lisa, you have a question. Go ahead.
Sorry, this might be a little bit of a digression, but that visual that you just showed us with the brain,
Mhm.
It made me think of like when I was a kid and we had to learn sight words, well, they probably still have to do that. When it's a sight word like the, and, does it not light up your brain all the way across because I'm not decoding anything in doing that? Or is it still?
So it's a hot topic right now. Great question. Okay, so most words that are considered sight words, so words that, we teach kids, oh, you just need to know these words because you're going to see them so many times. If you read, and if a typical reader, I'm not talking about a child who has a language-based learning, if a child's dyslexic, things are slightly different. But if you are reading a certain words in a certain number of times, and for most humans, it's like 10 plus, that is enough, around 10-ish. If you see that word and read it enough times, for your brain will actually just memorize it, especially if it's focused on sounds. So for example, let's say the word is at. At can become a sight word. A sight word is just any word that's like you can see by sight, right? You can see it and you can say it. That's what a sight word is. So for us, every word is a sight word. Not every word, but every word that we're coming, like if I read a medical textbook, no, they're not sight words for me, but if I'm reading a novel, they are. Let's think about the word, if we think about the word at, it's easier for kids to see it and say it as a sight word because it's phonetically regular. If we think about the word said, S-A-I-D, that is a harder word for kids to become sight words because it's phonetically irregular. And what you wind up teaching kids, though, is only one part of it is irregular. Only the AI is irregular in that word. So you just teach kids, you can sound out the first part and the last part, but the AI in that word, it says eh. So we just have to remember that. So if you sound it out, it might say Said, but you know that that word is really said. And there's a whole process of teaching it, but where reading went wrong in instruction is there was an overemphasis on memorization, and it didn't work for a lot of kids. There's only so many words our brains can memorize as whole units. There now is a huge shift towards sounding out even words that are irregular. That was a long-winded way of answering your question. Okay. There's an article. It's really helpful. It's a great article for just understanding why phonological awareness is so important for learning how to read. We're going to skip it because of time. If we have time, we can always go back to it. But I want to make sure that we get to like, how do you apply this in a preschool setting? Pretty much, I'm going to just summarize what the article will say to you. Let me go back for a second. Lost. Sorry, everyone. I lost my slide. Okay. Here we are. So the article highlights this idea that when you can identify and manipulate sounds, it is an essential piece of the puzzle for word reading. So on this slide, you see what happens on the left-hand side in the brain when you read, and on the right-hand side, you see what happens when you spell. Okay, so on the left-hand side, you see the left-hand side is reading, right-hand side is spelling. So on the left-hand side, you see that when you learn to read, you see symbols. C is a symbol, A is a symbol, T is a symbol. It's a shape, right? And we turn those symbols into sounds. K, a, t. Then we have to blend those sounds together, cat, to make an image and to know that this is the word cat. The opposite happens for spelling. In spelling, we hear a word, for example, fish. We have to break the word fish down into sounds, sh, and then we have to assign those sounds to letters to spell, F-I-S-H. Over here, you see the blending part for reading and the segmenting part for spelling are phonological awareness or phonemic awareness tasks and skills. And if a kid cannot hear at without letters and blends it into cat, or just, let's say, hear the word cup and say up, they're never going to be able to spell. And so that is why just this oral practice of blending and segmenting, which happens maybe at the ends of pre-K and in kindergarten, is so important for learning how to read. And kids can only get to this important part of blending and segmenting if they have it's very helpful to have extra practice with things like rhyming, onset rhyme, word awareness. So right now we're going to see a video. This is actually my son. He's 4. I'm not purposefully I always say, he one day just started like sounding out a few words. So I was like, oh, let's see how we do here. I'm a reading teacher. Let's see. And I filmed it. And what I want you to do is you watch this video is I want you to think there's some things that he's doing that are great. I'm so proud of him. But also, where is the breakdown? Like, why isn't he getting all of these words right? So that's what you're going to think about. Share sound. Okay, I can't share the sound. You should see it. Let me just turn up my volume. You should be able to hear it. Let's show him how we can read these words, okay? Can you hear? Okay. Ready? Sound, hold on. Sound it out. Ready? Do it again. Yes, good job. Let's do another one. Ready? Go. That's a T. Do it again. Yes, right. You did it. Okay, let's do another one. Ready? Go. Try it again. Yes, you did it. Okay, do another one. Go. Try it again. Yes, you did it. Okay, let's do one more. Ready?
He kept hugging mom.
Okay, ready? Go.
Excited.
Right.
But try it again. And you can imagine what happens after that. It turns into a giggle fest. And but let's think. He does, like, he knows his letters, he knows the sounds. That's something that comes easy for him. And he was doing a great job. He's 4. This is great. Not necessary, but great. But there was a breakdown here. And if you think about what the breakdown was, like, where do you think the breakdown was? Like, why wasn't he if he knows the sounds, why isn't he easily able to figure out what those words were? And you can come off mute when you have an idea.
This is not going to sound like a smart answer, but like he understood the parts but couldn't blend. Like he couldn't understand the whole. Like he knew what every sound was, but like when he had to smush, they didn't smush in his head.
It was phonological. It was phonemic awareness. It's the blending part that's missing for him, right? He can see a letter, and I am using lowercase letters because if you can, you should, because that's how kids will read. Once your kids know them, that's what you should use. They are harder to learn and recognize than uppercase, but that's how they will have to learn to read. So I realized to myself, I'm not trying to teach him how to read before kindergarten, but if I were, I would focus my time on actually just blending words without letters. I wouldn't even have letters. I would just say, actually we do this sometimes. We play I Spy. I'll say, I spy with my little eye, and he says cup, and he's practicing that oral smushing or blending without realizing it. If a kid, when he was earlier in the year, when his teacher said he didn't understand what rhyming words were, we practiced or how to blend syllables. I said, I spy with my little eye a banana. And he'd be like, banana, right? He has to push the syllables together to figure it out. So I played it and I played a game with it, and he really loved it, and he learned it actually pretty easily once I turned it into a game. When it's not a game, it's not as easy for kids. So this is all so important because, and you saw this here, right? If you can't blending those sounds together without letters it's a precursor to learning how to read. And hearing words and chopping them up into sounds is a precursor for learning how to spell. If you can't do those things, if kids can't do that, they won't be able to learn to, they will not be able to learn to read and spell without that. So you're probably thinking at this point in the session, this is interesting, but like, how is this really relevant for my preschoolers? And I've tried to like show you along the way how you can apply this to preschool. But also another thing to think about is we know that it's not the most important part of preschool. We talked about this at the beginning: independence, play, love of learning, fine motor, making friends. That's what's most important. But especially when we think about our pre-K kids who are going to kindergarten next year, we also know that kindergarten is not what it used to be. Whether that's right or wrong, we can't really, we're not going to debate that, but we know that kids are expected to learn to read by the end of kindergarten and write sentences. And that has impacted how parents think about kindergarten preparation and what parents do at home with kids. It's also impacted how preschools operate now. So if you are going to bring early reading readiness practice into pre-K, like learning letters, what research shows is that phonological awareness, because of everything we've talked about today, is just as, if not more important than learning letters when it comes to getting kids ready to read. And it's also fun, and it can be play-based, and which I'm going to show you, and it can be developmentally appropriate. And then this one other idea to keep in mind that's not so important right now, but we did reference this before, is that some of this work can be it's easy for some of your kids and fun, and it can also be really hard for some other kids, even in preschool, and you actually start to see it pop up. When you think about who this work is critical for and also who it's hard for, like who, for example, at age 4 and 5 can't rhyme, those are the students who potentially show signs of dyslexia. And when dyslexia as a disability, it's the core deficit is in the phonological processor part of the brain. So if we think about those brain images from before, fluent readers have, through a lot of practice, rewired their brains. So the phonological processor lights up. For a dyslexic kid, they have to have so much more practice than a typical kid to do that rewiring. And 1 in 5, a lot of research has shown that a lot more people are dyslexic than we realize. It's around 18 to 20%. And it can be hard to see in preschool, but it is already there because it's brain-based. And so studies have shown that students with dyslexia can show the following, or humans with dyslexia can show the following signs in preschool: delayed speech, trouble learning or remembering nursery rhymes, difficulty remembering names of letters in the alphabet, unable to recognize letters in his or her own name, doesn't recognize rhyming patterns. That doesn't mean, I always say this when I do this part of the session and I'm in person and I have co-teachers who are sitting together, they always look at each other and they start to think about that like one kid in their class. That doesn't mean that we've diagnosed a child, nor should we. It's just something to be aware of, that there are kids in your class that are going to struggle to learn to read, because that's part of, in every class there are. And a huge part of the remediation for a dyslexic learner is phonological awareness. So by starting to do some of this work in preschool, you are really helping those kids have a more even starting point. And research really shows that phonemic awareness can be developed through instruction, and that doing so significantly accelerates students' reading and writing. And the results are very long lasting. And that's why I always say that it is the foundation of learning to read and write. Before we go into what this can look like in a preschool setting, any questions? Okay. If you do, you can always just raise a hand, put it in the chat. Okay. One quick resource for you is in the English language, there are 44 sounds. 25 of them are consonant sounds, meaning you're putting your mouth together in some way, and 19 of them are vowel sounds. Vowel sounds are sounds where your mouth is open, like ah, ah. It's really important for preschool teachers, especially when we think about articulation, but also when we talk about sounds, that we're making sure that we are pronouncing sounds correctly and that we're correcting kids in a very specific way on how they pronounce sounds. So this is just a resource for you, but in your handout on pages 6 through 8, you have a sound pronunciation guide that what it does is it tells you exactly what your mouth should be doing when you pronounce a sound. So for example, if you're teaching if your kids are going on a sound hunt and they're looking for things that start with the F sound, but they find something that starts with the TH sound, you can say to them like, no, put your tongue back in your mouth, put your teeth on your lower lips and blow out. That's the sound we're looking for. That F makes that sound. So this guide can just help you be more specific in how you think about individual sounds. Okay, now for the rest of the session, we're going to talk about how you could do this in preschool. So a few things to note is that these type of activities, even in elementary school, are only done for around 10 minutes a day. If you wanted to bring it into pre-K, you would do this for like maybe 5 to 10 minutes a day, or whenever you have time, because it is a bonus to have this in preschool. And like we said, there's a lot of different ways you can build phonological awareness. There's so many different skills. So you want to choose the ones that are the most relevant for your kids, which are going to be working on those bigger sounds, rhyming, words and sentences, syllables, and onset rhyme. And we're going to talk about ways we can do that. One thing to think about is, I know a lot of preschools do letter of the week. So you can start to think about how potentially you could enhance something that you're already doing. So for example, if you're doing letter of the week, you may want to actually switch to doing sounds of the week. And where you're introducing not first, like this is letter B, B says B, but instead saying this week, we're going to focus on the sounds B. And here's an example of how you could do this. Like if you had 5 days and every day you did letter of the week and you wanted to switch it to sounds of the week, on Monday, you could introduce the sound. You could say it, you could do articulation practice, and you could share objects that begin with that sound. Then on Tuesday, you can again practice saying the sound, and then you can send kids on a classroom sound search for things that start with that sound. And then you can record those objects, either pictures of them or write them on a chart. Then on Wednesday, only on Wednesday, not before that, because sound should come first, you could introduce a letter. And you would only want to introduce the most commonly associated letter. So for example, if the sound was S, we're not going to teach kids in preschool that, well, C can say S, sometimes it's just going to be S. And then we could also do letter formation. And then on Thursday and Friday, you can sing songs with the sounds, or you can do sound sorts with objects or art activities with that sound. And you can practice from earlier in the week, maybe letter formation or going on another classroom sound search, something like that. But that's one way that you could bring phonological or sound awareness into a preschool classroom. Another curriculum that I really love, it's from a book, and I think it's a lot of the activities which we're going to look at are very, very preschool appropriate. They're all play-based. It's called Phonemic Awareness in Young Children. They categorize their activities into the different phonological awareness skills that we spoke about. So if you just wanted to focus on rhyming, you could just go to the rhyming section. If you just wanted to focus on syllables, you could do that. For preschool, just those, again, working with those big units of sound is what is recommended. Examples that you can see in this book are the Jacob, Where Are You game that I showed with you at the beginning, or I shared with you at the beginning of the session, where you have the student hiding. Another example of a game is listening to a sequence of sounds. This is on page 10 and 11 of your handout. And I'll just share with you quickly, do a quick overview of what this is. You would have students. This is another quiet game. Students are going to be sitting quietly, and you're going to choose objects that have recognizable sounds, maybe like a bell or a chime or ripping a piece of paper. And what you're doing is you sequence the sounds. So the children will close their eyes and you'll do 2 sounds. So maybe first you'll ring a chime, next you'll rip a paper. Then you have the students open their eyes and say what sound, and they say what sound was first and what sound was next. And what this does is it keys students into this idea that we can have an order of sounds, which then can eventually translate to letter sounds. So that's a fun game for preschoolers. Another example of a really great of a preschool game that I've done with 4-year-olds is called Troll Talk. This is on page 12 of your handout. In this game, the kids would be sitting in a circle and you would assign one student to be the troll. You have a basket of, and you explain there's this troll. It can be any creature you want. If you don't want it to be a troll, it could be anything, but we have a troll, and the troll loves to give presents, but he only speaks in syllables, and he'll only give you a present if you can figure out what he's saying. So the child holds this present. You could have a basket of them behind their back. Let's say it is a, let me look. Broccoli, like toy broccoli. And the kid would say, who's being the troll, broccoli. And the student would say, broccoli. Okay, you got it. Here's your present. Then they pick another one. They go to another person. If all of the kids in your class are able to chop up words into syllables, and they can take turns being the troll. But that's another example of how to play a syllable game. It's really fun and play-based. This is like again, we don't have letters, but this is what the troll going around. That's developmentally appropriate. And this is from Phonemic Awareness in Young Children, and you can get it from Amazon. So those are just some examples. We have a few minutes left, but I want to just make sure I leave time for questions about this or just literacy in general, and just end with this quote, which is that when studies have been done on phonological awareness in young children, it shows that measures of preschool ages children level of phonemic awareness strongly predict their future success in learning to read. So even starting this work at an early age, the impact is long lasting. And so if you are focusing on letter names, my tips are to focus on letter sounds. And that is me. And if you have questions, we can stop here, and I'm happy to, this is me and my info. I'm happy to answer any questions.